I'm guessing that many of you here are not farmers. Many fewer of you are farmers in the land of Israel. Fewer of you are farmers in the land of Israel during the days when the temple stood, which means you are forgiven for not knowing all the details of Bikurim, the mitzvah of bringing the first fruits to the altar, to the temple of Jerusalem. Now, when you hear the phrase, you must bring your first fruits, the first produce of the land, what would you imagine is going to take place? That you take the first fruits, right? If this is the first apple that has ripened, then this apple is on its way to Jerusalem once it's ready to be picked. Well, not quite. You would assume that it's first fruits. Most of us think of fruits as things hanging off of trees. Of course, the term is generally broader, so it means also things growing up out of the ground. But the sages teach us that it does not mean whatever you happen to be growing comes to Jerusalem, but only a few very specific species of produce. Your wheat and your barley, your figs and your pomegranates, your olives and your dates, these things are going up to Jerusalem. Seems like a random assortment, doesn't it? What are we talking about here? Not storage. These are the 7 species of fruit for which Israel is famous. If you're going to bring the fruit to Jerusalem, you have to bring the best. And what is the best? It's not your prize-winning turnip. It's not your giant pumpkin, right, which they wouldn't have had anyway as being a New World produce. It is the best that Israel has to offer that you happen to have grown. That might be disappointing to you out there, those of you that are turnip farmers. But no, that is not the first fruit. Or at least you can bring it and enjoy it in Jerusalem by all means, but it does not go through the sanctification process. It cannot be rendered holy. Likewise, there are rules of when we bring our first fruits. It has to be from Shavuot onward and not after Hanukkah. It has to be from this year's produce, not last year's produce. It has to be from this year's produce, not what will ripen fully next year. It doesn't sound as much fun anymore as just having your prize-winning apple that was the first to blossom. But that's kind of the point. You see, the mitzvah is not to bring the first fruits to Jerusalem. It is to bring these first fruits. The mitzvah is not just what you want it to be. The mitzvah is what it actually is. And the rabbis analyze this in much more detail of exactly how we understand this from the text of the Torah. They are not just making it up. They are reading it extremely carefully to make sure that we are doing exactly as was commanded. Because if it wasn't commanded, if I bring my prize-winning turnip and I bring it up to the altar in Jerusalem, and somehow I convince, blackmail, cajole a Kohen into performing the rites over this, I have not fulfilled the mitzvah. In fact, I have done the opposite. I have committed a transgression. My heart might have been in the right place. My turnip might have indeed been a blessing from God and a showcase of God's bountiful grace upon the land of Israel, but my action has gone against the mitzvah. And God's not really happy about that whole breaking a mitzvah just because you thought it was a good idea. Now, the reason I'm saying this about Bikurim is because I'm trying to prepare you for a bigger mitzvah question that is going to hit a lot closer to home in just a couple weeks. We're going to be celebrating the holiday of Rosh Hashanah in just a couple weeks. What is the signature sound of Rosh Hashanah? The shofar. I'm sorry, Cantor. The signature sound is the shofar. We're all beaten out by the horn of an animal, regardless of the training that God has enabled us to have. But there is a wrinkle this year when it comes to the shofar. And I don't mean the curliness of the shofar, which is Shabbat. For the first time in many, many years, Rosh Hashanah is conveniently falling on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, which means I do expect to see everybody both days because you have no reason not to be here on second day. See, the thunder agrees. But it does mean on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, there will be no tekiah. there will be no blowing of the shofar. Why not? The Torah says that this is Yom Teruah, this is the day of the sounding. Why would we not do it just because it happens to be on Shabbat? It's work. Not the answer. It's a very good answer because most things we don't do on Shabbat are in and of themselves melacha, they are work and therefore not allowed to be done. But the shofar is not considered work in and of itself. Well, for any of our wonderful shofar blowers, and I see that we've got a couple already here tonight, they'll know that it is definitely difficult and takes a great deal of practice and stamina, especially the full set of all of the notes, but it does not meet the technical definition of what is work. No, the real issue is that if we blew the shofar on Shabbat, that you would come to carry the shofar on Shabbat. And that carrying would be a violation of the Torah commandment, and therefore we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat. But now I can hear the wheels turning wonderfully. They've all loosened up after we talked about our turnips. Now you are saying, but wait a minute, Rabbi, isn't blowing the shofar also a mitzvah? So why would we not be allowed to do a mitzvah, even though there might be a problem with a different mitzvah? And why can't we just make extra effort to avoid that we don't carry it? Leave the shofar in the building overnight. I mean, there's lots of ways around this. Well, the answer is there are two different kinds of mitzvah. The mitzvah of blowing the shofar is indeed given in the Torah, what we call a deoraita mitzvah, but it was only considered a Torah-level commandment in the days when the temple stood. It would be blown officially for the community at the temple. Indeed, if you go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, you can see one of the very famous, too many famous things in that museum, plaque that says, "This way to the place of sounding." It's literally an inscription from the Second Temple period to point you in the right direction of where the shofar would be blown from in the temple precincts. But there is no temple in Jerusalem. As such, the rabbis teach that it is no longer a biblical commandment. It is now a rabbinic commandment as a reminder of those times, and I might add, a much more democratic commandment because now we're blowing it everywhere around the world rather than only in one place in Jerusalem. But the mitzvah of Shabbat is not dependent upon the status of the Temple of Jerusalem. Shabbat is Shabbat is Shabbat from the beginning of creation until its end, which means it is still a deoraita commandment. It is still a biblical commandment. As such, protecting it overrides the rabbinic commandment of continuing to blow the shofar even in the absence of the temple. Did I lose everybody? You see, when you want to do the right thing, you have to actually know what the right thing is. And you may want to do the right thing, and you may think it's your turnip, but if you examine the details of the situation, it may turn out to not be that. There may be other limitations. And nowhere is this seen more clearly than in what we should be doing during this time period, the act of teshuvah, the act of repentance, and in particular, the act of apology and the act of seeking forgiveness one from each other. Because too often, we seek forgiveness in ways that are not very productive. We bring to the person that we are seeking forgiveness from a shallow apology, if at all, a scoff that they are upset about the situation at all, or we bring them some compensation that is irrelevant to the damage that might have been done. I'm so sorry I humiliated you in public. Why don't I take you out for a nice dinner? Don't give me a turnip when I'm expecting olives and dates. This is not, you go and you explain to the people whom you embarrassed me in front of that what you did was wrong, and then we're talking about having a proper apology. I know that having dinner together is probably much easier for you and a lot less difficult for you to stomach emotionally, but it doesn't fit the mitzvah. What you did that was wrong, the mitzvah that you violated, must be repaired in a commensurate fashion. The mitzvah has to fit. The repair has to fit. We have to do what is needed in order to repair the damage that was done. This is one of the hardest parts when we tackle the task of teshuvah, because we would love to find an alternative. There was an entire section of European history where the Catholic Church came up with money alternatives known as indulgences that were wildly popular because they avoided all of this mishugas of trying to actually fix the damage that was done. But Judaism has said, rather unpopularly for 3,000 years, when you do something wrong, you fix what you did. And if you don't fix what you did, it's still wrong. And don't try and fob me off with turnips. Come, apologize, I will forgive you. But it has to be connected to whatever the deed was. When you search your heart wondering what you are needing to do between now and Rosh Hashanah, focus on this. What damage have I done? And what can I do that will repair it properly? Not what can I do to make it up to the person in some other way that kind of sort of avoids having to admit guilt or having to face the actual consequences of what I did. What did I do? How can I make it right? That's the mitzvah. Even if what else we might do, giving tzedakah to an unrelated cause, saying wonderful things in a different venue, might sound like a great idea and are still commendable in and of themselves. The damage is done until you take care of it. God has given us the mitzvah with great specificity, not because God is a lawyer, not because God is pedantic, but because God knows that those details make the difference in truly being able to repair our lives, our mistakes, and to truly prepare for a better new year. Sort, sift, decide. How will you match what you need to do for the year to come? Shabbat Shalom.